Hey friends, still thinking about Ed Piskor, his suicide, and the things that have come up since where you see videos from his family. And I made a comment in my last video that they can't take what you won't let them have. That's a Pop Weed Itself song. And some of the comments in the last video were addressing, Ed lost his career in comics, or he perceived it as such. We all know there's other people who have been canceled and came back, or like found alternate routes to the career they wanted. Now, I mean, losing an art show, losing a book deal, and probably not being published by Fantagraphics or any sort of like mainstream publisher, those are all huge blows. And it got me thinking, what were the alternatives then? Because we all have to grow and change our tactics as stuff happens in life or as technology progresses. Think of all the music people who said their career was over when Napster happened. And a lot of people who aren't being canceled are thinking that with AI anyways. So what specifically could Ed have done with his career? None of this would change what happened, even if you approach him with logic, because his mind and his spirit were in another place, which led him to his suicide. But if you're in a similar position, if you're losing partnerships and deals, what could you do? What could Ed have done based on people he knew? So Jim Rugg, sitting right next to Ed in Cartoonist Kayfabe, did Octobriana as a Kickstarter. Ed never did a Kickstarter. He expressed interest, and he had an authority in Jim that he could turn to and say like what works and what doesn't and what do I need to watch out for. I mean, that's kind of like the obvious one. He's already crowdfunded on Patreon, and he's already self-published with WYSIWYG, which he did soup to nuts. He made the book, he printed the book, he distributed it. And apparently, I mean, I rewatched a Kayfabe recently where he was talking about WYSIWYG, and he said he did really well with that financially. So that's one thing Ed could have done. They had Rick Veitch on, who's a hero to both Jim and Ed, and Rick does print on demand, and I think he uses an Amazon service to do that. I use print on demand for my zines, and I've gotten to the point where originally I used to like print them out, ship them myself, photograph them, and then sell them, at zine shows or in person or as like Patreon giveaways when they were at a certain level. And now I'm at a point where I'll just make like a few pages of the zine as a concept, and then I'll put it up on Etsy, and if somebody buys it, then I'll finish making the zine, and then I'll have a digital download component as well as the physical zine. So like I've sort of cut out a lot of the intermittent steps and the intermittent costs, but print on demand is a great way to make a thing when it's paid for, if that makes sense. And then you got people like Jeff Darrow, who came from the world of animation and did concept art for films. And then he has the comics career that we know him for, but he has these other things that it's still just drawing, and it could be like storyboarding material, it could be like Jack Kirby or Joe Mad going into animation, video games, concept art. But there's ways to parlay your comics career into other forms adjacent to comics, if that makes sense. It doesn't take away from your comics career. I do things with photography that aren't related to what I actually do. But once I had a job in a camera store. This is after I graduated college. And the guy, I was kind of like lamenting that I was working in a camera store instead of being Richard Avedon or A. Leibowitz or something like that. And he's like, well, are you making money off of photography? Then you're doing what you were supposed to be doing. And I realize that's really true of a lot of things. You know, bands, some of the jokes about being in a band is like you make money off t-shirts, you make money off tchotchkes. I just read an article about how Taylor Swift had, and the Rolling Stones, they had so many alternate versions of their new vinyls. And it's like you buy 4 of Taylor Swift's vinyl and you make a clock, something ridiculous like that. So it's like, yeah, you gotta turn your career into other things as needed. And then a fourth approach I thought about was Dave Cho, a person who's routinely canceled and who's been to prison and who's had like more money than most of us have ever thought about having as an artist, and probably lost it all. He had gambling problems. Like, he seems in a good place when he's on Kayfabe now. I hope to meet Dave Cho someday, actually. I think he'd be a really fun guy to talk to. But he's only made a few comics, maybe even just one, for all I know. And what is Dave Cho's art career? What is he? Well, he's an artist and a personality. He's a capital A artist. So Ed is a personality. I mean, they weren't going to take his YouTube channel away. He shut it down on his own, you know, out of his own shame, I guess, but or his own response. But just be an artist and be a personality, I guess, like Dave Cho. Whether or not it has to do with money rolling in or not, I don't know. I mean, a lot of times it has to do with the value you place on certain things, on certain levels of success. You know, there's plenty of people, like I mentioned Joe Mad, you know, like I don't see him out in public. Maybe he does cons, I don't know, but there's a lot of people who are just like behind the scenes people and they're doing fine. And there's people who are so in love with the craft, which I think Jim and Ed both are, that they'd be doing this for free. They've done it for free. They've been at other places. But I mean, long story short, a career is just not a steady climb up. It just isn't. And we could point to any number of people that we respect and admire. And, you know, Brendan Fraser, classic example, because where was he for decades? What happened in those 10 years? I mean, a lot happened. And I don't know, I mean, you can look at Ed's situation and slice it a dozen different ways about how, you know, tied in he was to social media and how he just couldn't turn it off, which is something everybody successful has to do at a certain point. And of course, like, he felt like he shamed his family, couldn't show his face in a small town in Pennsylvania, those things. But business-wise, that career could have been salvaged, mutated, turned into other things. And I hope that, you know, other creators who find themselves facing similar dead ends realize, like, it's just not over. Actually, today, with all the avenues that we have, I've heard comedians say this, I think it was Paul F. Tompkins, it's never been easier to be an independent creator than it is now. You still gotta fight above the noise and all that, but I mean, Ed had platforms, and if he explored some of those other options, who knows, maybe some of them might have even been more successful, more fruitful in the long run, or not. I mean, money's not everything, and if he made half as much money self-publishing and printing on demand as he did with the book deal, I still think that's half of $76,000 is, gotta do the math in my head, $38K for something he already made and that he owned full copyright and maybe he didn't have to distribute it on his own because he was doing digital sales and print on demand. I don't know. I want 38K. Anyways, I still love the guy. I'm gonna be thinking about him every day. Same way you hear Ed talk about like Akira Toriyama or Jack Kirby, he thinks about him every day. And I'm actually gonna get to work on my own comic right now because I feel like that's the best thing I can do to sort of like alleviate this weird grief I have for a guy that I never met, but is such a huge influence on me. So best of luck in your own creative endeavors. Talk to you next time.